My name is Camilla Stokes. I'm 42 years old, a senior policy analyst with the U.S. Department of Justice, and until that morning, my sister still thought I was just a clerical staffer somewhere in D.C., probably answering phones and filing things alphabetically. She never asked. She never cared to. That day, I stood at the edge of a marble conference table inside the main Justice Building in Washington, surrounded by federal attorneys, special advisors, and 3 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I held a binder in one hand, a laser pointer in the other, and 37 pages of classified briefing notes in my head. They were discussing jurisdiction implications, the weight of a pending case that could impact interagency protocols for decades. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Harris, tapped her pen twice on the table, then turned to me and said, "Camilla, walk us through the logic model you constructed. Start from the inflection point." I nodded. Calm. Clear. My sister, seated in the back as a communications consultant for one of the committee members, blinked. She looked up from her notepad like she'd just seen a ghost. "Cam," she mouthed, confused. "Yes," I said out loud. "Let me begin." And just like that, the sister they once described as quiet, helpful, but not leadership material, stepped to the front of the room. Past the policies, past the condescension, past everything they thought they knew, and changed the direction of a federal case. But before I explain what happened in that room, and why I was the one person the DOJ trusted to stabilize it, I need to take you back. To the beginning. To the dinner tables and job titles and family parties where people like me are rewritten before they even get to speak. I was 11 when I first realized what I said didn't matter. It was Thanksgiving. My sister Mel had just gotten early acceptance to Brown. My parents cheered like she'd won a Nobel Prize. There were toasts. Photos. She gave a small speech about ambition and potential. I remember clapping too long, trying to match their excitement. That same day, I had found out I'd been selected for a National Youth Civics program. Top 20 students in the state. I brought the letter to dinner. My mom skimmed it and said, "That's sweet, honey," before setting it beside the sweet potatoes. No one mentioned it again. That was the rhythm of my girlhood. Mel was the symphony. I was the white noise. She was loud, magnetic, polished. She won debate trophies and gave opinions about everything. I organized voter registration folders for our civics teacher and read Supreme Court dissents like they were poetry. Mel got the spotlight. I made the spotlight work. In high school, it got worse. Mel interned for a city councilwoman. I worked in the mailroom of a legal aid clinic. She wore blazers and flirted with power. I wore flats and took notes on which families got eviction notices most often. She once said to me, "You're so good with details. You'd be the best assistant ever." I didn't reply. But that night, I wrote down the names of every bill referenced in the county council meetings I'd transcribed, just to see if I could find the pattern in what passed and what didn't. I did. No one asked how. College gave me space. I went to American University. Studied policy design, not because it was glamorous, but because it made the invisible parts of power visible again. While Mel graduated with a communications degree and an internship on Capitol Hill, I buried myself in justice reform literature. I read until my eyes hurt. I analyzed procedural breakdowns like they were puzzles with people's lives inside them. I didn't go home that much. The house had too many mirrors reflecting back a version of me I didn't believe in. When I got my master's from Georgetown, Mel said, "Wow. I didn't even know you applied." I said, "That's okay. I wasn't waiting for you to notice." She laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. After graduation, she got a PR job with a lobbying group. I entered government. First quietly. Data analysis. Policy drafts. Then slowly, I began moving closer to the core. The rooms where language becomes law. The spaces where silence is mistaken for weakness, and then mistaken again. By 36, I had helped co-write 4 federal memoranda that shaped early release sentencing structures. My name wasn't on the front page, but the language was mine. My parents didn't know. They still thought I did something with spreadsheets. Mel once told a dinner guest I worked in office ops or something like that. I let her. Because I had learned something more important than proving her wrong. Power doesn't always need an audience. It just needs accuracy. I was 39 when I was first asked to step into a sealed room. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet calendar invite from a senior advisor named Malcolm Reed. The subject line was Policy Integrity Consultation. The location was one floor below where I normally worked, where names weren't printed on doors and laptops didn't leave the building. I wore a navy sweater and brought my own pen. I didn't ask questions. They handed me a 200-page case summary. It was about procedural loopholes in juvenile sentencing guidelines across 4 jurisdictions. Small oversights, easily dismissed, but dangerous when stitched together. It took me 6 hours to mark the patterns. I color-coded the overlaps, annotated a failure cascade, and suggested 3 points of stabilization. When I handed the binder back, Malcolm just said, "We'll be in touch." I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was told not to, but because I didn't want to hear the words, "That's nice," again from people who only celebrated what they could post on Facebook. Mel, by then, had pivoted into crisis communications for political figures. She showed up on podcasts sometimes, made statements on behalf of people who needed to look apologetic without sounding weak. Once, she called me and said, "Cam, I might be representing someone in your building. Any tips on how to not sound too rehearsed?" I was silent for 3 seconds too long. She laughed. "Oh right, you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. Anyway, love you." Click. That was Mel's magic. She made you feel like silence was agreement. But I was learning that silence, in the right hands, is leverage. By 40, I was lead analyst on a multi-agency task group quietly reevaluating structural integrity around the Bail Reform Act. My models helped map unintended racial disparities across county-level application. It was precise work. Unseen work. But work that reshaped lives. Still, Mel thought I was a glorified scheduler. "Honestly, Cam," she said over coffee one Christmas, "you're just not dynamic. You don't sell yourself. You're great with forms and facts, but you're not built for the big stage, you know." I nodded. Because I did know. I wasn't built for the big stage. I was built to design the scaffolding that holds it up. So I kept building. Then came the Rosenberg leak. It was a sudden firestorm. Internal memos revealed that a prominent federal judge had repeatedly used outdated sentencing calculators tied to biased data assumptions. Public trust wobbled. The media called it an institutional embarrassment. Internal chatter exploded. That week, I got another calendar invite. No subject line, just a room number. When I entered, there were 5 people in suits. One of them was Deputy Director Harris. She slid a folder across the table. "You've been tracking the legacy data issue longer than anyone else. We need your synthesis model, and we need it by Friday." I didn't hesitate. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I cross-referenced 4 databases, built a new projection engine, and layered in real-time deviation logging. I found the cascade point in the model, the exact line of logic that, once triggered, compromised sentencing accuracy across 2 decades of rulings. When I submitted the report, Malcolm replied in one line, "Brief the panel yourself." Monday, 0900, room 611C. I sat with that sentence for almost an hour. Not because I was nervous, but because for the first time in my entire professional life, someone asked me to speak in a room where policy wasn't just being discussed. It was being decided. Monday came. I wore a clean charcoal blazer. No earrings. No makeup. Just a flash drive and my binder, held tight in both hands. I stepped into the room. And that's when I saw her. Mel. Seated 2 rows back. She was advising a senator who sat on the subcommittee. Her eyes scanned the room, casual, until they landed on me. She blinked. Tilted her head. Confused. She mouthed, "What are you doing here?" And I mouthed back, "Working." Then I walked to the front, inserted the flash drive, and pulled up my model. I heard her gasp, just slightly, when Harris said, "This briefing is being led by our policy architect, Ms. Camilla Stokes." Mel didn't speak after that. She just watched, eyes wide, as I explained how quiet math can carry the weight of a justice system, and how no press statement can undo damage caused by bad data pretending to be truth. The briefing ended in 43 minutes. Longer than expected. No one interrupted me. No one questioned the methodology. When I presented the failure points in the sentencing algorithm and the way they'd been influencing judicial outcomes since 2009, one of the senior prosecutors actually leaned back and whispered, "Jesus Christ." After my final slide, Deputy Director Harris cleared her throat and said, "Effective immediately, MS." Stokes will be retained as the lead policy consultant on remediation protocol. We will base our next course of action on her framework. I nodded, then stepped back. I didn't expect applause. I didn't want it. But when I gathered my binder, I looked up and saw Mel still sitting in the second row, stunned. Her lips slightly parted. Her hand frozen mid-text. She didn't speak to me that day. But later that evening, she called. "Cam," she said. Why didn't you ever say?" "Say what?" That important." I smiled slightly, alone in my apartment. "You never asked." There was a long silence on the line. "I always thought you were just doing admin stuff." "I mean, you never posted anything and Mom always said you were just keeping your head down." I said, while building a model that stopped a federal data leak." She laughed nervously. Okay. Wow. You're really in this, huh?" "No, Mel. I've been in this." Another pause. Then, "Listen. This might sound weird, but my senator wants a talking point for tomorrow's interview. Something smart, but simple to explain the reform plan. Can you send me one of your summaries?" I almost choked. "You want me to ghostwrite your soundbite now?" "Well, it's not like that. It's just, you're good at boiling it down. You always were." I could hear the wine glass clinking. The way she'd always make requests sound like compliments. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and said, "No, Mel. I think it's time you figure out your own words." Click. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in our entire adult lives, she needed something from me, and I didn't give it. Not out of pettiness. Out of clarity. Mel didn't understand the weight of that day. But others did. By Thursday, I was asked to prepare a condensed version of my findings for the Deputy AG. I was told it might help guide a future public statement, or even shape legislative recommendations. I walked into that meeting with confidence. Not loud. Not cocky. Just steady. One of the younger attorneys stopped me on the way out and said, "Ma'am, your model changed how I think about all of this." I smiled. That's the point. Weeks passed. Then something strange happened. My parents called. First my mom, then my dad. They wanted to catch up. Hear how I was doing. My mother asked, "Are you still working in that little office?" I told her no. That I now briefed policy advisors on multi-agency reform strategies. She didn't know what that meant. But she said, "Well, your sister said you gave a really nice presentation." "That's good, dear." I wanted to be angry. But I wasn't. They had always seen Mel as the crown jewel. And me? I was the keeper of napkins and side dishes at every family event. The one who made lists, filled out forms, called caterers. But they never asked what I was building while they were looking the other way. The truth? I was designing the scaffolding of fairness. And no one noticed. Until the moment it was the only thing holding the system upright. I didn't need them to understand that. I just needed them to stop rewriting me. The funny thing is, after that, Mel changed a little. She didn't apologize. That wasn't her way. But she stopped interrupting me. She started listening when I spoke at dinner. And one night, out of nowhere, she asked, "Cam, how did you know that model would hold?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then said, "Because I spent 10 years being told I wasn't enough. That teaches you where every crack forms and how to build something that doesn't break." She said nothing. But this time, she heard it. A year later, I sat in a quiet federal hearing room across from 3 young analysts. They were nervous. One kept clicking her pen. Another had written "policy integrity interview" at the top of her notebook and underlined it 4 times. The third avoided eye contact altogether. I wasn't judging. I had been them once. I leaned forward and said, "You don't have to impress me. Just tell me what pattern you saw that no one else did." They looked up. One of them smiled. Just barely. That was the start of something. They weren't interns. They were part of a new mentorship pilot, designed for women in policy analysis who'd been overlooked. Quiet workers. Second daughters. Brilliant minds who'd been told to stay behind the scenes. The program wasn't my idea. Deputy Director Harris named it after my original proposal, Echologic. She said, sometimes the most accurate voice is the one no one heard until it echoed back through the system. I didn't cry when she said that. I just nodded. By then, I'd become the unofficial quiet fixer in certain circles. I was still invisible to the outside world. Still never quoted in articles. But inside the rooms that mattered, my name carried weight. Mel and we spoke more now. Not often. But better. She stopped assuming. She started asking. Once, she said, "You really were always smarter than me, weren't you?" I smiled. Not smarter. Just listening while everyone else talked. She didn't argue. She just said, "You'd be great on camera, you know." And I said, "That's exactly why I'm not on camera." She laughed. This time, it wasn't sharp. It was real. My parents still didn't fully get it. But that was okay. They stopped calling me Helper and started calling me Camilla. A small change. A massive shift. One evening, while walking through Judiciary Square, I passed the same office where I'd once submitted case summaries anonymously. The windows were lit, glowing. I paused. In the lobby, a young woman sat alone, reading a thick binder. She looked up, saw me, and smiled nervously. "MS. Stokes," she said. I read your margin notes." "In the sentencing brief." I nodded. "I'm trying to be you someday," she whispered. I stepped closer, gently. "Don't be me," I said. "Be the version of you they'll never see coming." She lit up. As I walked away, I thought about every room I'd sat in without being seen. Every word I swallowed. Every sentence I rewrote to make someone else sound smarter. Every time I'd made myself smaller to keep the system from shaking. And how all of it, every quiet act of precision, had finally become something loud. Not in volume. In impact. I didn't get headlines. But I helped rewrite policy. I didn't become famous. But I mentored women who might. I didn't speak first. But when I did, the room leaned in. My sister once called me ordinary. But now, in the places that matter most, I'm called first. Not for show, but for clarity.